Hello everybody, it's me, Fee, White Zulu, and welcome to another reading from my book of the same name. And I left you with my first taste of college, St. Anne's College, which was a bit terrifying. And I'm continuing with that. This is chapter 36, continuing my first term in the second form at St. Anne's College. Apart from having a few friends of my own age, and happily a really good best friend, Mary, with whom I could share my love for horses and dogs and be able to speak to in Zulu, I detached myself almost completely from school life and created a world of my own. I discovered the library, a little building all by itself at the bottom of the grounds on the way to the swimming pool. I immersed myself there every moment I wasn't being harassed into doing things like lessons, sport, or the relentless hours in chapel and church. I was allowed to take 2 books out at a time, and I read voraciously like a starved animal, picking books out at random and devouring them from cover to cover. I tried to read in class and got into trouble and regular detention on Saturday mornings, where I was made to write hundreds of lines or compositions on different subjects. I read library books in prep and was caught by the prefects, who unsportingly patrolled our classrooms for an hour early every evening and for an hour and a half later on in the evenings. I'll start again. Who unsportingly patrolled our classroom for an hour early every morning and for an hour and a half in the evenings, checking to see what we were doing. My punishments from them varied from cleaning their shoes to reciting poetry I'd had to learn off by heart or writing more lines. As second formers, we had to fag for the prefects. This meant doing all their little chores, like cleaning their shoes, their hockey pads, tidying and cleaning their wooden cubicles. Luckily for me, neither of my sisters made it to the 6th form, and they both dropped out of school without taking their matric, the final exams which allowed you to get into university. Otherwise, I can't even begin to imagine how awful it would have been to have to fag for either of them. I was fagging for the head of house, a sturdy, bossy, unpleasant girl with a hooked nose who played goalie for the first hockey team. I was nearly always late for my fagging duties, and running in late one afternoon, having just remembered that I was supposed to be cleaning her shoes, I managed to concuss our head of house by flinging her wooden door open just as she was bending over, facing it, tying up her shoelaces, and slammed the door into the top of her head. The loud crash brought the entire house full of girls over to see what had happened, and the prefect had to be taken to the SAN while I slunk off to detention, followed by the accusing eyes of the entire house full of prefects and girls. Swimming was horribly different from the pleasant splashing about in the heat of the summer sun we'd done in the river, in the sea at Salt Rock, and in the Knysna Lagoon. Swimming was overseen by the games mistress, Miss Mortimer, a butch lesbian with cruel little bloodshot red hungover eyes. She reeked of stale brandy or some kind of strong liquor, chain-smoked Texan unfiltered, and wore either divided skirts or a tracksuit. She even wore the grey flannel shorts on speech day when everybody on the staff wore their best. We never ever saw her in a dress. She had thin, tanned, brown, hairy legs and a leathery face like a bulldog's, and her lank, greasy hair was cut in a salt and pepper Eton crop. That's the kind when someone puts a pudding bowl over your head and cuts round it. Mort lived in a tiny two-berth caravan in the school grounds with the singing mistress, who looked a bit like and had modelled herself on Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music. Their caravan was parked in the driveway near the chapel next to the staff house, and was the first thing one saw as one drove into the college. I don't know what the powers that be were thinking of when they allowed this setup. We, as girls, didn't have any real idea of what was going on. There were rumours that these two were lesies, but not many of us would have known what one was. But there the caravan sat, and we who had to walk past it to get to early morning prep or early church services couldn't help but notice that the windows were always steamed up on the inside, or that there were several empty clip-drift half-jack bottles among a sea of cigarette butts on and around the caravan doorstep every morning. At swimming lessons, Mort stood under the diving board and made all the new girls dive in head first. First from the low board and then from the high diving board, which was terrifyingly high. Our pool was of Olympic size, and the diving board was of Olympic height. The high one, anyway. We stood there shivering, teeth chattering with fright, as she stood there on the ground, hands on her hips, whistle in her mouth, and cigarette spiraling smoke from her wizened knuckles in the chilly 6 o'clock morning air. "Dive, Ross!" she'd yell in her hoarse, ginny voice, as I trembled there, the water looking so it was a mile down. When I finally took the plunge, I hit the water clumsily, filling my sinuses with vile-tasting, over-chlorinated pool water, and had to drag myself out onto the side, spluttering and choking, while Mort looked at me scornfully and crossed me off as a possible diver on the clipboard in her hand. This was early on a Saturday morning. Although St. Anne's was a private school, still is, it still received some sort of grant from the Afrikaner national government, and we were forced to learn Afrikaans so as to follow the curriculum and pass the annual matriculation board's exam in order to get a university pass. We had 4 slightly shorter terms than the government schools got, and minimally longer holidays, as our school opted to work on Saturdays. We were allowed out from 9 until 6 on 3 Sundays a term. That meant out after church or chapel, and back, in my case, sunburnt and smelling of horse sweat White dresses were to wear the stockings, which had shrunk in the school wash so badly that they barely came over my very long, skinny legs and only just reached my knees. To hold these up, we had suspender belts with a sort of rubber knob and metal loop thing, which we had to somehow hook our stockings into to make them stay up. Glamorous. I had to let my suspender belt dangling pieces down to their utmost length in order for them to be able to reach my knee-length stockings, which meant I had a bare expanse of exposed skin, which got splinters in it from the wooden schoolroom chairs, and of course the pews and dining room chairs too. The knobs of my suspender belt also bit into my flesh as I sat down anywhere and pinched me with the little metal loops. My love for religion didn't increase when, after a wonderful day out on the farm eating roast lamb, followed by ice cream and galloping rocket over the veldt, with the dogs running behind, their pink tongues lolling out in the heat, I had to force myself back into my uniform and spend an hour on my bony knees praying to some remote and completely mysterious deity. The uniform, including my new cheap WG brown bra, Mum bought everything she could from there as we got a discount being shareholders, scratched my newly burnt skin, and the new shoes hurt my feet. My tummy was full and I was sleepy, and I knew the rewards of my evening were an hour more of this, and then the usual Sunday night supper of a small square of cracked and sweating cheddar the size of a matchbox, a bowl of dish-watery soup, and bed, with the unlovely prospect of having to get up the next morning at 6 when the early morning bell shrilled in my ear, and thus the week would go on. The next ray of hope and sight of being another Sunday far, far away in the foreseeable future. In my second term, I became depressed and exhausted, unable to find any reward in the daily grind of prep, chapel, lessons, meals, more prep, and finally more chapel or church. I hated it all equally and sought the odd half hour I could snatch here and there to read my precious library books. I was still having bad growing pains, and since I was eating virtually nothing, had absolutely no reserves of energy, which made me lethargic at the best of times. I longed to lie in bed or in a warm, sunny place and be able to left to read in peace. I turned out to be reasonably good at tennis, although not good enough to be picked for anything other than reserve for the house tennis match. Again, I found the difference from playing barefoot on our nice, slow, cool grass court at home, a far cry from tearing around in the baking heat which blasted off these unforgivingly fast concrete courts, wearing thin-soled tackies. I got a migraine on my first day playing in the middle of the summer heat. Never got as hot on the farm as we were nearly 6,000 feet up in the mountains, near Pietermaritzburg, one of the hottest towns in Natal. There were taps strategically placed for that very purpose at each court. Mort never allowed us to have a drink of water or wet our steaming, sun-baked heads in between sets. It was my first migraine, and I felt as if somebody had hit me over the head with a sledgehammer, accompanied by severe nausea. Mort made me play on, even though I was so obviously blinded from the headache and staggering around in agony. Gymnastics was easy. All my tree climbing skills came into play as I swarmed easily up the rope and touched the ceiling, the floor of our dorm, while other girls in my form dangled and sobbed from the ropes below me. My reward from Mort was her slashing at my bare, skinny legs with the string of her whistle, leaving a red wheal on my skin. I was supple and light and could do the gymnastics well, leaving her to concentrate on my more lumpen classmates who struggled with vaulting over the horse as she pretended to catch them. But I saw her step smartly back as they flung themselves over, leaving them to crash onto the mat on their backs, completely winded. I was also quite good at athletics and could run fast, hurdle, and jump fairly long and high. But I had no competitive streak in me. It had been whipped out of me by my sisters, who never liked to be beaten at anything, and one's reward for winning at whatever competition we had going on was a pounding. So I hung back and didn't give anything like my full effort. Ingrained in me was the prospect of a beating from somebody, not praise. Mort's attitude didn't help. She had her little clutch of favourites. Not unsurprisingly, they were the girls who were good at the various forms of sport, and these she nurtured in her creepy way, spending far longer coaching them than was entirely healthy for the rest of us, who actually needed the input. The rest of us were left to sink or swim and got berated by her, even if we put all our effort into doing something. She never gave out praise unless we were one of her pets, and no encouragement if she saw us doing our best, not even a grunt. By far my worst moment with Mort was my first ever hockey lesson. There, at the edge of the field, lay a pile of sticks with one flat curved end. Mort handed out some red and white vests, divided us into two teams, blew her whistle and pointed at the sticks. We picked them up, and glancing around, I saw what end to hold. Then she issued orders. "Ross, you play right wing," she yelled hoarsely at me. I looked around and saw the girls who'd been at the prep and who'd already learned to play hockey jostling around each other. The other new girls seemed to know what to do as well, because they'd also been to school beforehand. Then, when the whistle blew again, all the girls started to run towards one end of the pitch. I ran with them, and when they turned to run back, turned back with them. I had no idea what else to do. The whistle shrilled again. "Ross, what the bloody hell are you doing?" Mort bellowed at me. "When the ball comes your way, stop it." I never caught on to the rules and continued to run with the ball while Mort swore at me from the sidelines. Oh, school, the happiest days of one's life. Not for me anyway. I will see you next week. So I want to thank John Moslane for being my producer, Sean van Vuren for being my IT expert who uploads these videos and does a superb job in editing and running my YouTube channel. And if you want more information and to see more photos and more of my work, I've written several other books. Go to my website at www.whitezulubook.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.